Great, so now we have a class with some private attributes. The next thing we are going to do, and this is an important thing that you have to do for any class you create, is to actually define a class constructor. And the class constructor is actually a method. So when I say method, basically a method is a function inside a class, okay? That is simply a different name. So a class constructor is basically a public method you are going to put here. And the name of the constructor is the name of the class. Okay, it should be the exact same name. And it doesn't have any data type here. So there is no void, there is no int, long, anything. You just create the constructor like this, name of the class, okay? And then the parameters, so you can have some parameters, let's say byte pin, and then you can implement the function or the method. And this constructor is actually what will get called when you create an instance of the class. So this is where basically you initialize the class, okay? Because the class by itself is just nothing, it's just a kind of a structure. When you create an object from the class, this is going to be called. So here, of course, to initialize the class, I'm asking for the pin number for the LED. And so I can put this inside the private attribute that we have here. And to do this, well, I could do pin is equal to pin, but problem is here we have pin from the class and pin from the parameter. So that's not going to work because pin here is not actually the one from the class. Pin will be the one from the parameter. So that's simply going to put the value from the pin parameter inside the pin parameter. To solve this, we can do this and then an arrow. So the keyword this, arrow, pin, this means that we are going to use, so this refers to the class. So this is the pin attribute we have here. And this is the parameter. So what we do in this constructor is very simple. We just initialize the attribute we have in the class. So now the pin number is stored inside the class and we can use it in other functions. And coming back to the encapsulation with the private keyword, here you can see, so pin is private, but we can actually directly use it. We can get it and we can set it inside the class. So here we are inside the class. This is a public method. We are going to use the pin attribute here. This is possible. If you try to get direct access to this outside of the class, it's not going to work. The only option you have to change the pin is to create a class and call this constructor. Okay, and one other thing here for the pin number, well, there are different conventions for object-oriented programming. The one I'm going to follow is simply to start with lowercase, so just use them like normal variables. Another convention you could do is to start any attribute from the class, any private attribute, with a leading underscore. Okay, in this case, I'm going to comment this. In this case, for example, this and this are different. So you could do underscore pin is equal to pin. So as long as there is no new parameter or new variable that kind of overrides the attribute, well, you can directly call the attribute like this. And using an underscore here at the beginning, you can make sure that the name here of the attributes will always be different from the names of the variables you use in the program of the class. So this is an option. Another option, well, you might see stuff like this, like member, M for member. Well, there are many different options to write attributes. I'm just going to stick with maybe the most standard one, okay, which is simply to write the attribute like a variable. And then when you need to get the attribute, you simply write the variable. And if you have a conflict of name like this, you use this. So this line makes it very clear what we are going to do. And well, that's it for the constructor. With this, we will be able to create an LED object and assign a pin number here to the class. And finally, one important thing I'm going to add is add what we call a default constructor. So here the constructor has one parameter. A default constructor has 0 parameter. So For some classes, you may not need any parameter actually, so you could just create the default constructor like this. For the LED class, it makes sense to ask for the pin number, okay? Because if we don't know the pin number, well, we can't do anything with the LED. But because we create a different constructor, we are going to add also a default one and simply define it like this. And we don't write any code inside this. And maybe add a comment, do not use. And the simple reason why I'm doing this is because if you don't add a constructor like this, a default constructor, then later on in your programs, you may have some compilation errors. And I'm going to come back to the compilations error when we have the problem actually. So basically what you need to do, you create a default constructor every time. And well, in this case, we are not going to use it. So I just had here like a comment say do not use. A common thing to do in C++ is if you want to write a default constructor that you are not going to use, you can simply throw an exception here. But with Arduino, you can't use exceptions. So, well, I'm not going to make a very complicated thing here to handle the default constructor. Simply write an empty one and do not use. Alright, and now we have the attributes and we have the constructor for the class. And last note here, as you can see, you can add as many constructors as you want. You just need to provide different parameters. This is called function overloading. Okay, so you create different functions with different prototype here, which means that different number and types of parameters. So you give more options, okay, for the same function, you can have different number of parameters.